All right, everyone, good afternoon and welcome to GPN Technologies year-end webinar series, Visualize Your Success in 2020. My name is Yvonne Pelkey and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Before I introduce our featured speaker, just a few housekeeping items that I'd like to go over. First, our session is being recorded today, so in order to help reduce the background noise, you're in listen-only mode. However, we do encourage questions, so please utilize the chat feature within Zoom. We will have the recording available by the end of this week. If you're a current Edge Pro user, you can find the link within the Need Help section within Edge Pro. And for all attendees here today, we will email you the link to the recording by the end of the week. Speaking of Edge Pro, we want to help you achieve your goals and find your success. So take a look in the chat feature for a link for a free 90-day trial of Edge Pro. Also, towards the end of our webinar, there will be a 5-question survey. Please take a moment to complete that. Your feedback is incredibly valuable, so we can have these webinars and have continued success. Today is the second session of our year-end webinar, and our topic today is 5 key business areas successful practice owners regularly analyze. Today's featured speaker is going to take us on a journey that will not only help us identify 5 key specific areas that we should analyze on a regular basis, but specific key metrics we should utilize to align our goals so that we have a positive impact on those key business areas. On that note, I am very excited, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our featured speaker today, Dr. Scott Jens. Dr. Jens is an optometrist. He is co-owner of a multi-doctor, multi-location clinic in Wisconsin. He's the co-founder of Revolution ER, and thinking that he fulfilled his life passion in the ophthalmic industry, retired in 2018. However, today, he provides executive coaching services through the Sandbox, which helps optometrists and eye care professional businesses reignite their passions, which results in growth, better relationships, and personal freedoms. Dr. Jens?
Thanks, Yvonne. It's great to be here. You know, as a fellow colleague of all of you on the line, it's really impressive how many of you have turned out during the middle of a workday to think about practice performance, the way GPN Technologies has launched this webinar series, and I'm just really honored to be one of the contributors. When we talked about my participation, it's around this idea that I've created called Sandbox, which is sort of a playful examination into the way that we run our eye care businesses. And so what we're going to walk through today are important 360-degree ways of looking at the practice, not just as a business and how many, metrics-driven ideas you can put into play in analyzing your business, but also thinking about how you work on your business. So working on your business is different than working in your business. Going to the clinic in the morning, reviewing records in your EMR, looking at the patient flow for the day, advising which patients need OCTs, which ones are going to be in for vision therapy, which ones you need to do RX checks on. That's all working in your business. And many times we're so busy that the detriment of our business comes from not working on it enough. And patient care is what we do, but being able to spend adequate amounts of time with our team, our staff, and really asking them what our objectives and goals are for the career they're going to spend with us in our clinic, or reviewing our financials and finding ways to package those in a way where our team can be exposed to them so they can be motivated by them the way we are. In addition to actually not just outsourcing to our team all of the relationships with vendors, but becoming actively engaged with our vendors are all ways that I can demonstrate working on your business. So the goal that I would try to express to you today is spend some time working on your business. Now, you say to me as you're there without your speakers turned on or your microphones turned on, but Scott, I do that already. I do some of that, so give me more. So let's advance to our thinking a little bit to this idea that, okay, I've done enough in my business. I've got a great office manager. Many of optometrists I talked to today have chief operating officers. I never had that luxury. I had important business managers that worked alongside with me, and I had partners that each had a different skill set. But if you've got this impressive team to whom you're delegating, it's important that you define what kind of activities you want them to take and then empower them to take those. There's an incredibly good book written by a military general by the name of Stan McChrystal that I want you to make note about. It's called Team of Teams, and there's a follow-up book to it called One Mission. And General McChrystal learned that it was no longer okay for the military teams that were serving with him to come to him in the middle of the night and say, "General, may we bomb?" It was, "We have the information, we know what to do. You don't, General. If you'll trust us, we'll go do great things on your behalf, and then we'll revisit the outcomes." And so what is important in this team of teams approach is that you make clear, empowering decision-making capabilities in the mind of your team. And if some of your office managers work with your business leaders and owners to ask for that level of empowerment, and then expect to get reporting back on what those delegated activities actually turn out to, provide. Was the outcome good? Was it measurable? Were there outcomes that were concerning? So we have to have good teammates, but we need to, when we delegate, create clear expectations on what they can do, and then make sure that we don't threaten them with the risk of losing their job or losing their ability to perform by asking them to feel empowered and then revisit the outcomes. Now, the other thing owners need to think about is that they need to understand their business as well as anybody. I know we're busy. I know we see 50 patients in a day. I know vision plans have kind of robbed us of the financial freedom of seeing patients at the pace we want to, but I would make sure that you go to meetings, including with vendors from time to time. It gives you the chance to sort of, to use a team of teams phrase, parachute in with your team and understand what's going on at the front line. Create contribution opportunities for others. And that means actually creating decision teams around things. Sometimes we call these committees or workforces within our practice. Say you have an optical team that's doing the buying. You want perhaps a financial minded person in on that, not that the lead optician isn't capable of doing that. And then every now and again, sit in with that group and find out what's concerning to them. Don't just tell them, "Here's your budget, go do this and don't exceed the budget." Finally, if your thoughtful leadership is something that everybody in the team experiences, your decisions, when you have to make tough ones that are directional and ones that are outside of the group's decision, but decisions you feel you have to make, those decisions will be better respected. So in a delegating world, make sure you're involved and parachuting in with the group so they believe that the things you're saying are just as important as the things they're saying. You'll become equals with them. Are there any questions or anything? Yvonne, I can't hear you.
Oh, I think somebody muted me. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So a couple follow-up questions. When you talk about, team meetings and spending time with the teams, like what does that mean?
Yeah, so I think it's really important. And another General McChrystal bit of advice is meet regularly. The military, to defeat Al Qaeda in the 2000s under General McChrystal's control of our joint forces, met every day. Team stand-ups are something that some business owners have been really successful with. I would suggest that within clinic hours, so we're not asking staff to take time away from their personal lives, that we meet at least 30 minutes every week.
And that's your minimum recommendation. I think that's awesome because that also gives you the opportunity to kind of talk about like, what's the week going to look like as far as meeting your goals, which you're going to talk about in a little while.
And if you don't mind me adding, Yvonne, real quick, I know a lot of doctors look at that as cutting into productivity. That 30 minutes or 45 minutes is real productivity. I truly believe through measurable assessments that you will find that you will make it up in multiples of the loss of an exam or two in a week.
That's a great point because that was the next question. So okay. Thank you for that. You talked about financials and KPIs. Do you recommend full transparency when it comes to talking about financials and those sorts of things with the team?
I do. There are a number of great business principles around bringing the entire team in, and oftentimes those of us that are business leaders and optometrists are most fearful of sharing the financials because our staff will be able to triangulate our salary. Frankly, outside of the payment to the doctor, there is nothing that I think is so rarefied that it should be unexposed to the team. In other words, if you want everyone rowing the boat in the same direction, you need to give them cadence and measurements and sort of an opportunity to shout to them from the bow of the ship what's going on, because they're the ones feeling the oars in the water. And oftentimes we're seeing patients, we're feeling the work in the practice, but they're seeing the performance of the practice. And if you give them insight to it, aside from doctor pay, I think that everything should be visible to the practice team.
Great point. Thank you.
Sure. So what we're going to do from here, and we'll take more questions as we get toward the end of these 5 areas, is let's look at the various areas. Not all of them are quantitative. Some of them are qualitative, meaning they're about how everyone feels, not necessarily how things look on numbers or KPIs. Are these 5 key practice areas that I want to dig into. So let's go to the first one, customer experience analysis. I'm a big fan of the Walt Disney World properties, both Disneyland in California. I've got Mickey Mouse over my shoulder back here. I'm a big believer that if you don't measure it, you don't know how to do anything about it. And the Disney business principle around that is measure and assess and then change based upon those measurements. So what's the ideal measure of a customer experience? If your patient is your customer and that's the experience measurement we want to look at, I think of rebooking as a very critical measure. In other words, what's the likelihood of a patient at the end of a visit to say, not pre-appoint, but actually appoint me at the next visit, that I'm willing to say, I don't know what I'm doing next year on November 5th, but I'm willing to come back and see you again next year on November 5th. Of course, we talk a lot about referrals, and scheduling family members is an important part of measuring how good the patient experience was. If somebody's willing to bring her mother in for a visit because her visit was really good with you, or somebody's willing to schedule his son, or if somebody's willing to schedule their life partner, these are really important and very specific measures of how well the patient experience was received. Of course, if somebody purchases a prescribed treatment, and that could be everything from signing up to do some sort of laser vision correction referral, or going to a third party for a referral, like another optometrist for care, or an ophthalmologist for a retina visit. Those are also good measures of customer experience. Bad measure of customer experience is, can I call you back and do that later? That should give you suspicion that a person's not just very comfortable with what they've experienced, and maybe that's just how much time they spent in your clinic. That's also a sense that you should be getting a measure on. Of course, there are tools for measuring customer experience, surveys from SurveyMonkey, and also from our third-party partners like DemandForce, Solution Reach, For Patient Care. These well-known tools that many practices have implemented, those should be used. And we should have somebody in our practice that's a kind of a marketing person, whether that's the doctor or an assigned staff, be monitoring social media. I know that Google survey results and how many stars we have on Yelp matter, and there are incredible experts in our space that you can listen to about that topic. That's not my thing, but actually go out and read the posts and engage. And engage sometimes means you have to deal with frustrated or annoyed patients who are hiding behind their screen and their keyboard. And I guess I'd really suggest that you think about asking for honest feedback. And that means asking a patient within the dialogue of the visit, have we done well for you today? And if we haven't, would you be willing to tell me? Putting your emotion in front of the patient as a healthcare provider, especially as a visual care provider, is something that the patients aren't going to find off-putting. And it takes a lot of development of your sort of abilities and skills and just your confidence to do it. But ask your patients, did we do well for you? And if we didn't do well for you, can you tell me what that would look like? Because oftentimes the follow-up by emails and surveys sometimes becomes a little bit less personal. I'm not suggesting you ask all 50 patients in a day for feedback, but I'm suggesting that you think about doing this as a really important assessment of your customer experience. So let's talk about the next area of the practice we should look at, and that's team culture. This is very qualitative. It's very difficult to get a feel for how the people that work for us feel in the business, whether they feel empowered, whether they're just showing up for the paycheck. And listen, staff issues are what I hear from optometric association leaders, one of the biggest issues that eye care practice owners deal with today. So one of the things that I would suggest you do first and foremost is that You commit to a positive company culture from day one. And that means by leading an environment of trust. We've already talked about empowering our team to execute on their own behalf because they're the ones that are front lines. Let's also say on a regular basis, we trust you and believe in you. And that will cultivate this culture of trust. And then if we work on trust every single day, if we work on who we are and how we show up to work, and listen, I'll tell you, if there's any of my old staff on the line watching today, and I hope they are because they're Edge Pro users, I'd like to say, I apologize for some of the days that I was that guy, the unapproachable one, where they knew something was on my mind. They knew something was bothering me. And yet they always supported along the way because they knew that if we got through that rough patch, it was going to go back to the way we wanted it to be. And that's really about supporting one another. So team culture is something you should actively work on. Now, there are tools that you can activate to empower trust. We talked just a moment ago about staff meetings. I know that investment's difficult, but I would recommend at least 30-minute staff meetings. I would also think about one-on-ones, the idea that you will invite people, not just at review time, to sit with you and talk with you about what's going on. Let's say you've got a 3-optician, 3-business office, 3-technician team. Let's say there's 10 of you in the practice. Yeah, that's a lot of meetings, but it's sort of like one a week over the course of a quarter. And it really pays back in great dividends. You're going to try to get out of surveys and how do you feel about the business at the point where you're trying to tell somebody why you can only give them a 75-cent an hour raise this year. I mean, people want to feel like they're coming to work to participate, not just to collect the check. I truly believe that. And I think this stuff about millennials and Generation Zers being flighty employees is something we experience, but I really believe they want to participate in a just cause. And optometry practices give a just cause. It's creating a quality of life improvement for people through better eye care. So please work on that with your team. And if you don't have technology, whether it's just Skype accounts that are on the computers or Slack or a system that I have an interest in called Third Space, where a business can actually facilitate better culture through developing technology connections within the company, you're probably not taking it far enough. So think about implementing tools that help you do it. It's a small investment for a huge return. Finally, the phrase that I've always had is if culture is not top of mind, it becomes bottom tier. And that's where we get into turnover issues. So team culture is the second very qualitative topic. Let's go on to our third topic. This one's less qualitative. It's equipment and infrastructure. And this has to do with our physical space, not only the building, but the parking lot and the tools that we use to examine our patients. While we do all have sort of a general sense of what we can afford and what we've invested in and when it's time to clean the carpets, I suggest that part of the budget process, you think more clearly about an equipment and facility plan. First of all, I suggest that an equipment plan and the related financial commitments be thought of as a proportion of the practice's profitability. In other words, take some of the profitability of the practice and turn it back into the company to make the patient experience stronger and to make the connection with your patients better. The experience in the end will be better, and the health care that you're delivering, the visual care that you're delivering will be improved. That means don't just lease things coming off of a trade show because there's a smoking hot deal you've heard about. Sometimes you should buy hardware or software that matches the growth plan. This is something that I actually heard validated by last week's speaker, Mickey Kling, just in a conversation I had with him recently. And I love Dr. Kling's approach to the profitable practice. If you haven't seen that session, go back and watch it. But Dr. Kling and I were talking outside of these webinars and saying, too many doctors get tied up in monthly fees on things where they should just, sort of bookmark the growth of the practice, the earnings of the practice to future growth by buying things that they need for the business. And that could include new chairs, new phoropters, new examining equipment, or maybe even just new spaces for the patients in which to sit. Your facility needs attention. There's one thing that former Disney executive Dennis Snow taught me. Dennis has spoken at eye care conferences. I hosted him at an eye care conference that I ran. He's got an incredible look at things. His book's called Lessons from the Mouse. I have no financial interest in Lessons from the Mouse, but Dennis Snow talks about the Disney principle, put yourself in the guest's position. And your patients are your guests in your facility. Are the chairs comfortable? When's the last time you sat in a waiting room chair? When's the last time you thought about how the air blows out of vents, or whether it's too cold or too warm for somebody that comes in at different times of year in your practice in your part of the country? And think about how the parking lot is accessible or not. Think about how clear the snow is in the Midwest in November, or how the smells are coming from a particular part of the business. Maybe the staff room where people are heating up tuna sandwiches and microwavable lunches. Do we want that permeating into the clinic in the pretest area at 1 o'clock in the afternoon? The point I'm giving you here is that there are real metrics-driven approaches you can take to how you purchase and lease equipment relative to your profits from a given year. There's also the qualitative approaches to thinking about the way the facility looks, is experienced, and I strongly recommend that every practitioner spend time every quarter looking at your infrastructure and your facility.
Dr. Janice, I have a couple of questions.
Let's stop. Yeah.
A couple questions that came in from the last slide when we're talking about one-on-ones. Do you recommend that one-on-ones happen with doctors, or can it be done through like an office manager? So the attendee indicated that they had 38 staff members on payroll.
It's a practical impossibility for a doctor that owns the practice, or even if there's 2 or 3 doctors in a 38 employee practice, to meet with every one of those people every quarter. So again, with delegated authority, if the practice team fully understands that the practice manager is acting as a proxy for the doctor and the business owner, that talking to that person is talking to Dr. Jane, the owner, then I think that you can definitely use a delegated team to do that. But please don't forget, doctors, the importance that the staff feels in meeting with you. They see almost an envious position that the patients have in spending that really quality time with you. They really see that if you have scribes in the exam room, because they see you performing on stage at your best. You're bringing your A game, and they don't always get you at your A game. They get you in an office meeting. You show up to a few minutes late, you leave a little early, and they don't always get a chance to come into your personal space and find out more about you. So I think that it's wise to delegate, but please make sure that then you're having those periodic group meetings, whether it's once a quarter or not, where you truly have a chance to ask them about them and they have a chance to ask about you. Become personally connected with those people.
A lot of questions coming in on this last slide. You talked about, as a perspective of a doctor going in and sitting in the waiting room chairs. When was the last time you sat there? When was the last time you felt, the air coming out of the air conditioning vents? But I think an important area as well is like, what about the staff and getting their input on, types of equipment that might make their job easier, or, I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a practice and I'm looking at somebody sitting behind the front desk and their chair is falling apart,
Yeah, I mean, let's have some fun with this and my Sandbox way of doing this, right? I love the television show The Office. There was an episode in which Steve Carell, Michael Scott, the character that ran The Office, found out that he had a surplus and they needed to decide what to do with the surplus. And through the entire episode, they talked about whether or not they would get a new copier, they get new chairs, and so forth. And the process was really interesting because it plays out like that in real businesses all the time. What is our budget for facility improvements, and what are we going to do about it, and who gets to vote on that? That is one of those things where I talked about decision teams that I would recommend not just be the doctor and the practice owner. Make a clear declarative at the beginning of the year that we're going to budget $5,000 for stuff this year. Let's talk about things in the practice as opposed to we're moving our business to a new building. And we've got a decision to make about things that are good for our patients, things that are good for us as our team, and things that are good for maybe the doctor, patient throughput things. And then put that team together and have them converse about it, and then have them ultimately kind of formulate the recommendation, then have that recommendation come back to you. And although you have veto authority to say, I don't really want to do that, if the team comes up with it and the team feels like everyone had a chance to sort of vote on it, if you will, it's going to make for a much more enjoyable spend of that money. And I think it's going to create a better culture. So that's one way to look at it. Using the office perspective is, ask people what they're experiencing. And sometimes it is that the person that has the worst computer needs a new computer before we need a brand new digital phoropter. Those are important decisions to be made through a team approach.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on to patient throughput. Now, I was very fortunate many moons ago to work with a group that came out of Johnson & Johnson's Vision Care as an unpaid advisor to something called OD Lean. And if any of you have ever worked with OD Lean, which is no longer part of J&J Vision Care's offering, you're very fortunate because these were some incredible thinkers. The team down in Jacksonville, Florida that was there were people that were experts on something called Lean. Lean is associated with Six Sigma. It's a way of manufacturing where we don't do things necessarily efficiently, but we do things with such caution and throughput mindedness that the end result is the least amount of manufacturing errors. And these statisticians that were lean experts were brought into Johnson & Johnson to figure out how to manufacture one-day contact lenses. Today, we think nothing of selling one-day contact lenses to our patients. There's many companies that make them. But to manufacture 365 pair of contact lenses for a patient, as opposed to the old way of 12 or 24 or even one pair for a patient in a year, means that you have to have most of those lenses come out the end in perfect quality. You can't afford for one or two pairs of those to be bad. And so lean is a construct in which you think about the endpoint being an optimized endpoint, the least amount of flaws in your product that you're manufacturing. Let's apply lean thinking to eye care. That means that we have the greatest outcome from every patient encounter. Another way to look at it is that we optimize the number of patients that we see through a very process-controlled experience in the clinic. And that gives us the maximum number of outcomes that aren't defective. And this is a new way, in many ways, for many of us, a new way of thinking about patient care, which is defective outcomes are those patients who don't schedule their husband or wife for a visit, that don't bring their mother-in-law in for a visit, etc. Does the exam process end with a rebooking or with a buy or with a validation that the experience was good? I mean, we're not dropping our patients on their head at the end of the visit to measure whether it was a good experience. We're thinking about what is the process and how can we control it in a way where the patient feels like it was a great experience, and we can measure that through a KPI experience. If we look at the entirety of the patient experience, door handle to door handle, in other words, when they grab the door handle to come into the clinic, and then when they grab the door handle to go out of the clinic, is that process something you've examined at every step? Do people's eyes look up from the front desk to greet somebody on the way in? Or have you built an Apple type experience where you have concierge check-in? Are people being, taken care of when there's other people checking out and waiting to check in? And the whole process can be examined all the way down to, let me give you an example that's very specific to the patient experience. Do you just put the Ishihara color vision test in front of every patient, even though you've tested the patient on Ishihara color vision every time coming in here and you know that this male has got a color vision deficiency? Do you give the color vision deficiency test at a time where a patient says their eyesight's changing and you've already done a benchmark baseline, and otherwise you just give it to new patients? My point is that from a clinical perspective, doctors can give themselves all kinds of evidence-based reasons to give certain tests. Give that sort of same evidence-based approach to every test that you and your team run, but also to every experience that everybody that touches the patient care experience will deliver. That way you can assess for opportunities that give you clear process plan improvements. And that allows your staff to make decisions on how patients flow as opposed to you making that decision. One of the most important parts of lean that I learned is taking monuments, large, everyone's got to go through them parts of the visit, out of the visit when they don't have to be there. Because backups and slowdowns and patient dissatisfaction comes from moving every patient through the newest thing that we bought at the trade show. Let your team make exceptional patients the exception. You have a rule, you have a process, follow it, but also guide yourself toward optimized outcomes by giving them the authority to taking them out of that process if it means better patient satisfaction in the end. So those are some of the areas to think about. And I ask you as a business team, business owner and everybody else, to talk at business meetings once a quarter, doesn't have to be the same time you're talking about other things, about patient throughput optimization.
So Dr. Jens, a couple more questions here for you.
Great.
One of the things that you talked about was, making sure that the entire team, like looking carefully at each individual person that's touching the patient as they go through the journey within the practice. What are your thoughts about scripting for the staff, or do you even recommend scripting?
I love scripting, but I have a caveat to that. So scripting should be the playbook, right? But some of the best acting that we've ever seen in movies and film, television, and otherwise comes from people who are allowed to improv. So what you want to do is create process controls with scripting that we recommend that we tell every patient exactly what we're doing for this test, why this test is being done, how it's being done, and what it means to me. But that means also that when that test isn't going to be administered or the patient's struggling, we don't make the patient feel like that was a bad thing for them, right? So scripts will be, I need you to do this. Please put on these 3D glasses. Please look at this box and tell me which dot's popping out of the page. And when the patient says, I don't see it, you say, okay, that's fine. This is just one of the tests the doctor uses to measure you. I've got another one that I'm going to try, as opposed to saying, oh God, that was wrong, right? So scripts can sometimes control a little too much. Doctors like scripts because they're sure that it delivers a quality standard. Staff sometimes like scripts because they feel like it helps them be able to deliver information to a patient that's a little bit more rote in instances where they don't necessarily understand what that test means. The in-between is we've got to work together to allow those times where it doesn't make sense to the patient for the staff that's got a script expectation to go ad lib. The most important example of that, if I can finish, is when weight and height measurements were invoked in the old meaningful use days. Anybody who followed my times as a sort of a meaningful use expert in the early part of the 2010s understands that when optometrists were asked to take height and weight, it was sort of like, we're going to do that? Should we script that? How are we going to tell patients that matters to them? And a lot of practices were very successful with that by coming up with a script. And what they said is, we care about your whole wellness. And one of the most common things that affects eyes and causes eye disease is diabetes. And then they would say, you don't generally look like somebody who might be at risk for diabetes, and I'm sure you're with your physician on regular care, but we want to put this into the medical record in case we ever have to talk to your doctor about your fitness levels when you had an eye exam. Something like that. And when practices did it, I was thrilled to see that it was a very scripted, controlled approach as opposed to off the cuff. That's my feeling about scripts.
And to be sure that there's some role playing that's involved in this, right?
From a training perspective, sure is.
Absolutely. Can you just elaborate a little bit further on what those monuments are, or your thoughts on monuments that cause those backups and slowdowns that ultimately result to patient dissatisfaction?
Surely. So the first monument is paperwork at the front desk. I just went to the physical therapist this morning because I got a little impingement in my shoulder. And I showed up 15 minutes early. By the way, if you ask patients to show up 15 minutes early for their appointment, that's when you're actually asking their appointment to begin. We can have a whole separate discussion about that if you want to email me another time, but I think that you should be forthright with patients about how much work you're putting on them. So 15 minutes of paperwork is a monument. Now, not everybody that you send generic PDFs are going to print them and fill them out, but if 30 or 50 or 75% do, and you ask them to do it because that means that their patient experience will be a little bit more efficient when they show up, and you actually deliver on that, patient paperwork could be done at home more often than not or through electronic portals, and that's a huge monument. Another monument is a big piece of equipment that you think everyone should be measured with. That could be a special type of tonometer or a special type of digital refractive device or some sort of new eyelid, gland measuring device that we want everyone to touch. Or a digital imaging device of the retina, where we say, hey, listen, not only is this important, but we want you to pay for it. And now it becomes a monument because the person's paid for it and they got to get through it, and they kind of have to get through it before they see the doctor. Those are monuments. Finally, the checkout process and paying for services is a monument. So when you think about that end of visit experience where a patient's already kind of looking at their watch because they got to get back to work or they got to pick up the kids at preschool, it gets to be kind of tough to say, hey, by the way, I need you to stop over here. David is our bill collector, or our payment processor, and I need you to swipe your credit card. Think of these things as monuments. Are there ways that we can move those experiences in different spots of the encounter to try to help out? I mean, taking digital payments, taking electronic payments, taking payments through patient portals is an example of how to sort of rid yourself of that last monument I spoke about. Those are examples of monuments.
That's perfect. So a couple more questions for you. When you think about the patient experience, what are your thoughts about incorporating secret shoppers to kind of provide some feedback on their experience?
So the general feeling I have about secret shoppers is positive. The problem with implementing secret shoppers before we go any further is it builds a level of sense of distrust in the staff if it's not properly explained. In other words, you're going to kind of sample me one day every quarter to make sure that I do everything right every day. And what you're really trying to do is give me a gotcha. If we can avoid the implementation of those kind of tools as gotchas, and we really build this empowered execution team approach. So we sample with secret shoppers less than once on one person, and then we hold that person accountable in a staff meeting by saying, well, we called up and David answered the phone as opposed to Beth, and David didn't say, hi, it's Dr. Scott's Eye Care. How can I help you today? He just said, hey, Dr. Scott's Eye Care. And he doesn't do that right because he only takes payments, and that's really Beth's thing. And Beth's going to work with him on it. And it's not this sort of public airing of grievances. Secret shoppers work great. Why is that? It's because the reality is that we have to be sort of in our own minds held accountable to the processes we've been asked to deliver. And so I know this sounds like a sort of a twisting of the words that I just used, but we want that accountability to be something that is something the staff feels like is their expectation on themselves as opposed to the business's expectation on them. So if the team's involved in choosing how secret shoppers do what they do, and we know that secret shoppers will ask about contact lens fees, secret shoppers will ask about whether or not we do digital imaging and whether I pay for that or insurance pays for it, and whether or not I take XYZ vision plan, and everyone's kind of examined that way. And sometimes, hey, maybe doctor is examined through secret shopper activities by how they do what they do in the exam room. Then it becomes a much more equitable way of measuring the business. So those are the general quick thoughts about secret shopping.
Perfect. A lot of great questions coming through. You talked about, one of the monuments causing a backup is at the front desk and people filling out paperwork and those sorts of things. Does filling out paperwork online, does that expedite the check-in process, or does it lose that personal touch that you get when you walk in?
Well, at my physical therapist's office today, I not only filled out 5 pages of paperwork, but then was handed an iPad that had the same set of questions, everything from what's your height and your weight and which arm hurts and why, that I had answered in paper. So it certainly wasn't more personal if they had sent that to me. I think the key about how personal the paperwork and the data collection is whether the patient perceives that you actually are using it. In other words, we have this feeling that we want to put on the patients to fill out the information of, do you have high blood pressure, diabetes, do you ever had cancer, do you have dry eyes, do you have blurry vision, do you have stinging of your eyes at night, do you use a computer, right? All the things that eye care practices want to ask. And then we get in the room and we haven't actually built a process to analyze that data, to do something with it. So we say, hey, I haven't checked it yet, but do you use a computer? That is the end of story. It doesn't matter if you collected it on paper or digitally. But the advantage of digital is that you say, we know that it's going to take you 15 minutes one place or another. We want you to do it on your free time. So when you come into the practice, it's going to be a better experience. And then when they come into the practice, there's actually a different experience that is a streamlined experience. And that includes the first person saying, I saw you fill out your paperwork. And when Joe picks you up from the front office, it's going to take you back and ask you some questions, but it's going to be clarifying the answers you already gave. And when Joe goes in the back room, Joe says, hey, I see that you filled out your paperwork and you take lisinopril for high blood pressure, and you don't have any other health issues. That's great. And you start off by actually talking to the patient the story they told you in the paperwork. So I'm less worried about whether it's electronic or paper and more about whether or not the staff is actually deployed the information gained in the visit to make the patient experience a better experience.
That's great point. When you think about, again, speaking to patient experience, how do you correlate that to professional development for staff?
Well, the professional development of staff is much more multifactorial than just patient experience. I mean, patient experience is something that we really need to live out through great team culture, great leader. If Dr. Jane is leading the business by the person who's on stage, willing to be on stage every day in front of patients, and that filters through the staff, we're probably going to have a great patient experience already. And we're sort of developing our team along the path of daily patient care. Now what we've got to do is we've got to have, staff enhancement and development through other areas. Like, have you been given authority to oversee one of the departments of the practice? Are you given authority to oversee something like contact lens trial management? Are you giving authority to working with the cleaning staff and giving the cleaning staff who comes in at 5 in the morning some feedback? So the office manager and the doctor doesn't have to do that, but you now have fulfilled somebody who's maybe an optician or a technician to being actually responsible for the facility. So I think personal development is another way of saying growing their role in the business as being an independent manager of the business, even if they don't have manager in their title. And too many times we think of our team as fulfilling a role and, sort of winning in that role. Like, you run frame purchasing. But what if that person also takes ownership over exam room cleanliness? I mean, what does an optician know about exam room cleanliness because they aren't doing the cleaning? Well, they're consumers of all kinds of different services. What if an optician is the person who every day gives us a check mark, good or bad, about exam room cleanliness? That's a nice way to cross, if you will, function your team to feeling like everyone's involved in everyone else's business, which is going to make us all better and sort of mutually accountable. Ultimately, personal development of our staff means giving them more responsibility. Patient care experience is one, but as I've just given examples, there's a ton of additional ways to motivate our team to have more responsibility.
Thank you. One last question on the paperwork. So when you think about patient questionnaires and things like that, how often should we be reevaluating our questions to make sure that we're asking the right ones? And do you have a way to gauge?
That's a good one. One of the reasons I got involved in electronic records earlier in my career, some of you may know I was involved in electronic health records, was that I had some disdain for paper record keeping. But along the way, our paper record keeping was almost never the same year to year. So the best way I can answer the question is not with some sort of authority position, but just my experience. We would constantly change the way we asked questions and where we asked the questions and how we delivered the review of content, because we thought it was important to not just have the patient experience the same thing every year. So when we started with review of systems, we'd ask people about their high blood pressure, diabetes, and other things. When they came back the next year, we would actually, with paper forms, say, this is what our record system shows you to have. Is there any change? Now, that may or not be the way that everyone wants to do it, but we actually got the patient's eyes on the data and let them have a peek at it. And that sort of changed the process. I'm not so sure that there's a different way to ask, has your insurance coverage changed? I think it just becomes part of the process, but asking it in a way that makes the patient feel like it's not just a rote activity, but they're being engaged in the process because it's going to improve their experience, reduce the amount they have to pay out of pocket, or improve their experience with the results of their examination in the form of vision correcting devices or referrals that they get. I mean, patients just want to feel like they came to you and that they would never want to go to anybody else because they're going to come back next year and it's going to be a refreshed version, a 2.0 and then a 3.0 version of your experience. That's how I would look at the paperwork. Think about it in the form of improving it every step of the way, even though there really is rote activities. Involve the patients. Patient health records, these online systems that your EHRs offer, are great ways to involve patients that will do it. Maybe that's only 10 or 30% of your patient base. Let them do it online. They feel like that's an enhanced experience.
Thank you so much. So sorry about that. Lots of good questions coming in on the patient throughput.
What's really cool is that I got to thank you that are still on the line, because our participant numbers actually gone up while this has been going on, which means that we're actually delivering something that you're making notes about. And again, I'll give you a chance to email me to ask questions separately, because I really want to support GPN Technologies in this approach to practice performance improvement in 2020 by being a really active participant in this. And Yvonne, you've done a great job of sharing those questions with me. So let's get to the last point of the 5 areas, which is dependable metric benchmarks. That was a mouthful. We talk about KPIs, key performance indicators, almost like they're table stakes. Like everyone's got a KPI, and yeah, I look at KPIs and I read the journals and I know what the key is, and I'm in a performance group and I know what the numbers are and I look at those. But are we really looking at them in the way where they're the blood pressure and height and weight of the practice, where they're vital, and when they go wrong, they're signs of something going bad, like a disease setting in? So I'm going to give you a few key benchmarks that I think every practice owner should look at, and many of you probably do already look at these or more, but at a minimum, I recommend 4 effective metrics. I think you should look at comprehensive exams per day, some form of optical add-ons, contact lens fits per month, and something I call the 99214 to 99213 ratio. So here's why these 4 metrics are a great starting point for every practice to start sharing in business meetings, office meetings, and having everyone in the practice look at them. Comprehensive exams per day. We all know that that's a very a varied number based upon season, based upon what's going on with school and not school, what's going on with the weather, and all kinds of other variables. But when you look at comprehensive exams per day on a year-over-year basis, you're starting to get a trend of whether or not the practice is growing or not. More importantly than that, you're starting to get a sense of whether or not your bandwidth in your practice is going to need more practitioners or a change of how you look at what you're doing in terms of insurance providing. Do you need to see Medicaid patients? Do you need to see vision plan patients? There's just a lot of things that we start filling our books with that are revenue producing, that aren't comprehensive exams, but the center point of patient experience based upon the way the public understands optometry is what the phrase I don't like, right? But I'll use it here, routine eye exam. Let's call them comprehensive eye visits. However you want to grade them, however you want to refer to them, a comprehensive, complete visit of the patient on a once every 6 months, 1 year, or 2 year basis, depending on how you do it, is a really important metric. Your optical health is not always measured as well by number of glasses as by number of add-ons. That means second pairs, photochromics, ARs, blue light treatments, special kind of thin and lights, whatever those things are that matter to you and your type of patient base. Measure optical add-ons, and often measure them by the people who are in that area, so we know, can create a little friendly competition on knowing that everyone's rowing the boat in the same way in the optical. Contact lens services are what patients often look at our practices sort of like an extra. It's for some people, I can't touch my eye, I won't do it. I really believe it's at the core of primary care optometry, contact lenses, the development now of contact lenses for patients who have situational conditions that couldn't wear contact lenses, like dry eye, conditions like lenses like sclerals and others now give us specialty opportunities, are incredible ways to measure the growth and the health of a practice. So please think about fits per month. How are you going to do that? Well, you're going to have to think about how you code them and how you collect fees for them. So you can go back and look at data about your fits per month, but I really like that metric. And then this 99214 to 99213 ratio is something that I developed with a friend of mine that's an optometry pioneer. I love this man, Dr. Chuck Brownlow, who's fully retired now. But Dr. Brownlow taught me a lot about the importance of optometrists getting paid for the service we already deliver. And I know you've heard about this from a lot of different writers and authors over the last 20 years. And as 9921 blank codes start to go out of fashion on how much they'll be paid in value-based care, I still think whether we code and document care at a level 4 relative to level 3 is a measure of how medical our practice is. And so having said that another way, if you have one 99214 for every 99213 in your practice, you're probably living a real medical model practice. If you don't want a medical model practice, that's fine. Stay in the 92,000 codes and do your thing. But if you have one 99214 for 5 99213s, you're probably not comfortable with your documentation standards. You're actually giving incredibly in-depth optometric care that deserves to be paid more, and the insurers will pay you more. And insurers and payers actually don't mind paying you equal amounts of 99214s to 99213s. So go take a look. You're going to find out tomorrow or maybe this afternoon how medical your practice is and how inclined you are to have a medical practice. If you don't have a 1.0 99214 to 99213 ratio, think about it again. Get resource development in your practice to make your billings go up. And actually there is a fifth. There's one more thing, as Steve Jobs used to say. I like the medical diagnosis ratio. The medical diagnosis ratio is the percentage of patients upon which you've put a medical diagnosis on their fee slip. Even if they're routine vision exam patients and you're giving them an S code for their visit, are those patients diabetic? Are they hypertensive? Do they have some sort of ICD-10 code around dry eye or eyelid dermatologic management, whatever that may be? If you've got more than 25% of patients that have a medical diagnosis code on all billings that you do in a time period, you're really driving and thriving in an eye care practice that is serving the community beyond primary eye vision care. You're doing primary eye health care. So those are the key metrics. I am sure you'll come at me with a ton of others and say, is this important? The key is pick the ones that matter to you. And the last point here, because I think Yvonne's got something to share as a visual, is use dashboard technology. Obviously, GPN Technologies has Edge Pro, and Edge Pro is a really powerful tool. I strongly recommend you use some form of dashboard technology because you need quality and consistency in any quantitative measure of your practice. Yvonne, go from there.
Yeah, so thanks, Dr. Jens. While you were talking, one of the things that I wanted to do was go ahead and set up my dashboard for all the optical, add-ons that you talked about so that I can watch this not only from a week to date, but maybe a month to date as well. The other thing that you kind of talked about was, that 99213, 99214 ratio. Under our CPT breakout, we can pull this out. We can see, our comprehensive exams versus our 99 codes. Can you, if this was my practice, I think I would be, I need to probably rethink my strategy a little bit here.
Well, I mean, let's be fair. There are so many different types of primary care optometry practices, and I'm not saying if you don't have 99,000 codes billed, you're somehow not measuring up, because there's just wonderful diversity in optometric practice. But most optometrists in the last 20 years have used 99,000 codes, and in this case, you're using very few, special ophthalmologic service codes. You're using almost, no 99,000 codes, and you build a 99213, but you haven't built a 99214. Now, this might be a very narrow window. This might be just some fictitious data, but I'll bet you for practices that have Edge Pro and look at this dashboard later this afternoon after this meeting, they're going to see almost across the board about a 0.25 ratio between 99214 and 99213. In other words, it's 1 99214s to 4 99213s. That has to do with our confidence and our commitment to really be willing to tell an insurer, hey, I did this really in-depth service. I need to be paid for it. And the payer, there's no additional service in your business just to build these insurers for the services they're already willing to pay you for. So in this case, yeah, I'd like to see many more 99214s. I've seen 99214 to 99213 ratios as high as 4-to-1, where a doctor's billed 40 99214s in a month and only 10 99213s. And they're not getting audited for that. They're not getting audited for overcharging. They're being looked at as a practice that's got a lot of value being delivered to the cohort of patients that have a lot of medical and eye health conditions that they have to manage. So yes, please, Yvonne, bill more 99214s and get actively involved in healthcare patient care.
And I am sure, like, if I needed some support, I could reach out to you on how to make that happen, right?
Sure.
The other thing that you talked about was, comprehensive exams and, kind of tracking that from a day-to-day perspective. And I love that I can be able to do that in here within Edge Pro. So, if I know that it's difficult to have like a magic number, like, right, how many comprehensive exams per hour? That's the $1 million question. What are your thoughts and recommendations on that?
Broad-based, I'd love some feedback on this, even if it's critiquing feedback. My broad-based approach is like this. I think that a really stout optometric practice can have 10 comprehensive visits in a day in a 20 operating day month and have incredible success, because you're not just seeing 10 patients, right? 10 comprehensive exams, 10 visits, 10 slots in an 8-hour day where you're taking 20 to 60 minutes with a patient to do a wide variety of things for their needs is going to give you a very robust practice. If you're less than 10 comprehensive visits per doctor in a day, you're wanting to spend a high degree of touch with the patient, a high degree of conversation. Maybe you have a more elderly patient base or a very pediatric patient base. You're doing more specialty care. You can still have a very strong revenue practice at less than 10. But 10 is really an important sort of stay at level watermark approach that I recommend. And that's per doctor, of course, in the practice.
That's a good one. 10 for all 3 doctors would be not a very fruitful day.
That's right.
Perfect. As I switch back over to your presentation, I just have one other follow-up question for you. And, we talked about those 5 different key areas. And I can only imagine, just like any other goals that we try to set, if we do too many things at one time, it can feel very overwhelming. How do you go through those 5 key things pick the one that's like the most important. Do you do them all at one time, or do you kind of spread them out over the course of a year?
Well, I think of the life cycle of the practice. I mean, many of the practices that are on the line here are probably, 5, 10, 30 years old or more. And maybe some are brand new startups that are just kind of starting to figure out where this is going to go. What you need to do is you need to think about looking at these various assessments, a 360-degree approach of the practice as sort of the lifeblood of the practice. So talk to the team about what's most important, right? Do we really have a culture issue? And if so, let's talk about it. And if we have a culture issue, let's make that number one. Let's just keep patient care the way it is. But let's talk about our culture issue. What does that mean? Let's start having some one-on-ones with the doctor and the team, or the office manager and the team. Let's start thinking about ways that we can give a voice to those that are at the front lines and see patients and see the reactions to the way the doctors behave and the way things are going on. And let's make that the issue for the next 6 months, knowing that we're not going to stop that then and then pick up on KPIs. We're also going to say, in the meantime, our main KPI is number of comprehensive exams in a month. And so you can address each of these in incremental fashion. Nobody ever, there are wonderful stories of people who lose 100 pounds in the course of 6 months, right? The key is sustaining that over time. And they don't do it just in one thing. They do it in a multitude of approaches. So it's really important that this be perhaps the year 2020, which has always been thought of as the year of optometry, be the year where companies like GPN Technologies encourage those that are on the line of sessions like this to really start to take control of their lives and say, we're going to sort of take a fitness approach to the business. We're going to look at it from a bunch of different angles over the course of the next year. And we don't know what's most important, but join me on this journey, team. And let's start by saying, what is the most important? Let's look at our facility. Let's look at our patient throughput. Let's look at KPIs. Look at these 5 areas that I've shared with you today, and let's decide which one's most important. But don't try to be a winner at all of them right away. The winner in the long run is slow and steady.
Very true. One other question that came in regards to, you have a patient that comes in for, just a routine comprehensive vision plan exam. And while you're going through the examination, you uncovered that they have an incidental medical diagnosis. How do you handle that situation? Do you bring them back on another day to address the medical concern, or do you go ahead and see them in that same office visit?
So I would be succinct, but probably too succinct. If we've got our process set up, when we've collected their information about their vision plan and their health insurance, somebody in the practice has said, the reason we collect both your vision insurance and your health insurance is we take care of both aspects of your eye health. We take care of how you see, we take care of how healthy your eyes are as organs. So that's why we need both of these bits of information. Almost no eye care practice sets somebody up with a script like that to explain why we collect that information. Now, as the doctor in the examination, there could be others involved, including technicians and para-optometrics. But during the examination, I'm describing what I'm doing as part of this eye examination and why your eyesight and your eye health both matter to me. And then I find a blot hemorrhage in the retina that suggests that maybe this patient has high blood pressure or diabetes that's undiagnosed. They're there under the auspice, and I'm here for an eye exam because my vision plan pays for it. As much as they don't want to be back, if the system has sort of shown them that I care about everything and I care about their time in a way where I say, this is really important. I need to get you through this to get you the glasses that you needed. You need new bifocals, whatever that thing is. You go ahead and build the vision insurance. You say, I need you back in 3 weeks to review this eye health matter. Then I'll be able to have better information with which we're going to start to share it back with your primary care doctor and maybe other doctors along the way that I'll make sure I'm the eye, I'm the compass for the eye care part of it. I'm going to have you back in a few weeks. That visit will be covered by United Healthcare, Medicare, Medicaid, whatever the health insurance is, just so you understand that. And we're going to look into that and get, proper authorizations for you for that. You can have a both and situation. What's really difficult, what a lot of, there have been lecturers have recommended is when you see a health issue, it became a health exam. If that's not what the patient asked for, under medical records audits, you may end up, being able to bill and collect insurance from the health insurance at that first visit. but you've, first of all, not optimized the patient experience, because now you switched it and you put the risk of that being questioned by the insurance plan, because the patient says, I just went for eye exam and I ended up having this thing about blood in my eye. So I like to bill them for what they said they came in for, because the patient reason for visit matters, and then bring them back for the healthcare visit, but have the entire continuum of service that they're being provided make that context understandable to the patient. In many patients' case, they don't even know that we provide eye healthcare, and they like to hear that story from us over time. So it makes sense as to why I might come back a few weeks later to have my retina checked. I can't see my retina. I don't even know I have a retina. I don't know why there's blood on my retina. You know, those kind of things, bring them back for that. That's my sort of succinct way of talking about it. There are a lot of different ways to handle it, but that's how I would recommend generally that case get handled.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I know we're right at the 3 o'clock hour, and I want to make sure that you finish up here on your presentation. I'm going to say
it this way. We don't have to cover these bullet points. The point is, you have now sat through, I mean, in droves of people, you have sat through a conversation around the various ways and various angles through which to look at your practice, whether it's talking about team dynamics, how you express yourself as a leader, whether or not you sit in office or waiting room chairs. We've talked about a lot of different things today. The goal of this presentation is to get you to think about those things that are important, so you drive leadership around those important things, and then you're going to get to the kinds of revenue and profit levels you want, and maybe even beat your expectations, because you have such a focused approach, as opposed to just coming and working in the practice, and you now are thinking about working on the practice. I know you have contact information for me, Yvonne. I am very happy at no cost to give people a bit of email dialogue if they like it. Certainly happy to have those of you that have known me, or maybe even those that don't, send me a text or give me a phone call to talk about these things. I really have a passion for helping optometrists drive their businesses, because you are the hero of the eye care world. You're taking care of patients, affecting their quality of life, and I want you to do that the best way you can, and I hope that you have great success in 2020. Thank you for this opportunity to GPN Technologies, and I hope everyone here is great in 2020.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Jens. We really do appreciate you being part of our webinar series, and I know this was probably a topic in which it's going to get people to think a little differently about their business, and identify some opportunities in which it can help grow their revenue, and and all that good stuff. So, like Dr. Jens said, his email address is up here at the top. As a reminder, we have a 5-question survey in the chat box. Please take a moment to fill that out. And we will see you guys back next week, Tuesday. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye.